History has a habit of dressing evil in silk. In ancient palaces where kings ruled and nobles dined under golden ceilings, another world existed, one hidden behind embroidered curtains and guarded doors. This was the royal harem, and it was nothing like the fantasy people imagine. To outsiders, the harem seemed like a paradise: beautiful women, soft music, and endless luxury. But to the young girls trapped inside, it was something else entirely. It was a silent prison built on obedience, fear, and control. In empires like the Ottomans, Mughals, Persians, and even parts of imperial China, royal harems were not just personal pleasure houses. They were powerful political institutions designed to keep the king satisfied, loyal bloodlines growing, and potential threats under control. But at the heart of these systems were girls, often children, taken from their families and stripped of identity. Many of these girls were captured in war. Others were bought in secret markets. Some were even given as gifts from one ruler to another. They arrived in the palace as strangers, too young to understand what was happening, too scared to ask. Once inside, they were renamed, reclothed, and retrained. Their hair, their voice, their posture, their eyes, everything was changed. They were groomed to please, but not just physically. They had to entertain, flatter, and obey. They were taught to be silent, to never ask questions, to always smile. The youngest girls were considered the most valuable. They were believed to be pure, untouched blank slates to be shaped into the perfect companion. And the kings didn't care how young was too young. In the Topkapi Palace of the Ottoman Empire, hundreds of these girls were kept behind iron doors. Only the most powerful eunuchs and the Sultan himself could enter. And once a girl was inside, escape was almost impossible. They slept in shared rooms with no privacy. They bathed under watch. They followed strict schedules. And if they broke a rule, no matter how small, they were punished. Some were beaten, some were starved, some simply disappeared overnight. But the most terrifying part? This system was seen as normal, even glamorous. Artists painted it, poets praised it, historians skipped it. And yet these girls screamed into pillows while the empire outside cheered for its glory. In this series, we uncovered the disturbing truths behind these hidden institutions, starting with what happened before the girls were even chosen, because the process of selecting them was just as dark as what came after. They didn't volunteer. They were chosen, or worse, taken. In ancient empires, the girls who ended up in royal harems didn't simply appear. They were hunted, handpicked, and filtered through a brutal process designed to break them before they even saw a palace gate. Some were captured during war. Soldiers would raid villages not just for land but for bodies. They'd look for girls with perfect skin, symmetrical faces, and silent mouths. Those who screamed or resisted were often discarded or worse. In the Ottoman Empire, elite soldiers known as the Akir Kapask were tasked with selecting slave girls for the imperial harem. They roamed conquered lands with one goal: find young, beautiful girls who could be groomed. Age didn't matter. In fact, younger was better. A 10-year-old child was ideal, young enough to be trained, old enough to survive the transformation. Parents were powerless. In many cases, they were told their daughters were being honored. They were being chosen for a better life. But behind those polite words was a terrifying truth. Once a girl was selected, she was never seen again. In China's imperial system, it wasn't only about beauty, it was about control. Girls were often taken from poor families who had no way to protect them. Officials would examine their feet, their teeth, even their walking posture. If a girl blinked too much, she was rejected. If she looked confident, she was considered dangerous. In Mughal India, daughters of defeated kings were often taken into the emperor's harem as a way to humiliate the enemy and absorb their bloodline into the empire. These girls were paraded through the court like trophies, wearing fine clothes but carrying silent shame. Once selected, the girls were transported like cargo, covered in veils, locked in carriages, surrounded by armed guards. No eye contact, no talking, just fear. And yet, these selections were celebrated. Royal records called them purifications or renewals of beauty. Courtiers sent congratulations. Poets wrote verses. No one asked what the girls thought. No one cared what they felt, because in the empire's eyes, they weren't children anymore. They were investments, property, pieces in a game of royal power. And once they arrived at the palace gates, the real nightmare began. What followed next was not just grooming, it was erasure. A process that stripped them of everything they once were and replaced it with silence. The palace gates didn't open with celebration. They opened with silence, because once inside, a girl ceased to exist. She wasn't called by her name anymore. That was the first thing stripped away. Training began immediately, not in reading or writing, but in obedience. Girls were taught how to bow without sound, how to walk without looking up, how to hide pain behind still eyes. If she flinched during her training, she was punished. If she cried, she was told to cry quietly. Loud emotion was seen as rebellion. In China's Forbidden City, young slave girls were forced to memorize every detail of imperial protocol. Which way to face when the emperor entered. How to kneel without shifting their weight. Some were trained for years before they were even allowed near the inner court. But behind the rules was a darker system. The older women, the eunuchs and senior concubines, became enforcers. They were once victims too, but now they were tools of the system. If a new girl resisted the grooming process, it was these former slaves who punished her first. They reminded the newcomers, survival meant submission. In Mughal India, the zenana was divided into tiers. The top women were pampered favorites. But the lowest girls, newly captured, newly groomed, lived in dark, cramped cells. No jewelry, no light, no voice. Just waiting. Many tried to run. They were caught. Few tried to take their own lives. They failed. The palace had its own doctors trained not to heal, but to keep the girls alive enough to serve. Even in luxury, they were prisoners. Their baths were scented, but watched. Their beds had silk, but no safety. Every mirror reminded them they weren't people anymore. They were property polished for royal use. Some girls, still children, were forced into performance. Singing, dancing, reciting poetry not for joy, but for judgment. One mistake could mean removal from the harem. And removal didn't mean freedom. It meant erasure, exile, or death. And yet the outside world envied them. To commoners, these girls lived in gold. To scholars, they were muses of art. To royalty, they were currency. But to themselves, they were echo shadows of the girls they used to be. The most feared moment wasn't when they were captured. It wasn't the training. It was the night they were chosen. The first night. It didn't matter how old they were. Some were still children, others barely teenagers. Once the king, emperor, or sultan pointed his finger, or had one of his advisors whispered the decision, the girl was summoned. She could not refuse. Refusal meant death. In the Ottoman Empire, when a concubine was summoned for the first time, she would be bathed in rose water, dressed in silk, and led through secret passages to the sultan's chamber. She was told to smile, to obey, to be silent. But in truth, she wasn't allowed silence, not in that room. She was expected to flatter, to entertain, to submit. She cried, she was slapped. If she trembled, she was mocked. She was told, "You are lucky." In China, concubines were examined by officials before the emperor ever touched them. They were forced to strip, stand under torchlight, and be measured like livestock. Some emperors demanded virginity tests performed with brutal, invasive methods. If a girl failed, she was discarded like broken merchandise. The night wasn't about love. It was a test of ownership. In Mughal palaces, young girls were drugged with opium-laced wine to dull the fear. Their minds clouded, their bodies weak. They were offered to royalty under the illusion of grace. But when they woke the next morning, their childhood was gone, so was their will. That night changed everything. Once used, a girl was no longer in training. She was property. Some were promoted. If they pleased the ruler, they were showered with gifts, given better quarters, and protected from punishment. But even then, their safety was fragile. If the ruler grew bored, they were replaced. If they became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter, the child might be taken. If it was a son, the girl might be poisoned to prevent political threats. One Persian ruler was said to rotate his favorites weekly. Those not summoned for over a month were quietly removed from the palace, sent to monasteries, exiled to outer provinces, or sold again. And yet the system never broke. Guess the palace had hundreds more waiting, groomed, drugged, terrified. And outside the walls, the empire celebrated its beauty, its culture, its poetry. They never saw the girls bleeding into silken sheets. They only saw the gold. Not all cages are made of iron. Some are made of rituals, rules, shame, and fear so deep it changes how a girl breathes. After her first night, the girl didn't return to the same place. She was moved to a higher level, a more guarded section of the palace, sometimes called the inner chamber or a privileged quarter. But her world didn't get bigger, it got smaller. She could no longer speak freely. She could no longer leave the palace. She could no longer be seen by men. In the forbidden city of China, concubines lived in rows of isolated rooms, guarded by eunuchs, castrated men trained to serve, but also to spy. These eunuchs listened through the walls, noted who cried in the dark, and reported even whispers of rebellion. In the Ottoman harem, the girls were watched by the Kisler Uga, the chief black eunuch. He controlled who met the sultan, who got favors, and who disappeared without a trace. If a girl was caught writing a letter, trying to send a message, or speaking too familiarly with a servant, she could be accused of treason and executed. But most didn't try, because escape didn't feel real. They had been broken before the bars were even built. Language was restricted. Some girls were forbidden from speaking their native tongue. They were forced to adopt the court dialect, the palace manners, and the obedient smile. Even tears had rules. Much crying was weakness. No crying was suspicious. One Persian girl, according to old records, was said to have not spoken a word for months after being chosen. When she finally laughed at a joke told by a prince, another concubine accused her of seduction. The girl disappeared by morning. Her bed was gone. Her name never spoken again. Psychological control was more powerful than chains. The girls were told their lives outside the palace no longer existed, though their families wouldn't take them back, and their purity was now royal property. Some were even told that if they left, demons would find them. These weren't just lies, they were cultural cages built over generations. Religion was used as a leash. Some rulers claimed divine right over the girls. In some cases, priests or court imams blessed the grooming chambers. They said it was an honor to serve the ruler, that their bodies belonged to the empire's will. And because many of these girls were taken as children, they believed it. The most painful truth in these royal systems: not all torment came from the kings. Sometimes it came from the girls who once cried in the same beds. Once a girl settled in, if she survived the trauma and rose in favor, her power changed. Some were given jewels, larger chambers, or servants. A few were granted permission to speak to the king. But with power came responsibility and manipulation. These once victims were now told to recruit others. In the Mughal Empire, older concubines were given grooming roles. They were tasked with watching the new girls, training them, and preparing them mentally and physically for service. The language was always the same. If you don't do it, someone else will. You'll survive better if you listen to me. I'm helping you. In the Ottoman palace, women who rose to the top, called Kadın or Haseki, sometimes led the selection of new concubines. They chose girls based on appearance, background, or behavior. If they sensed resistance, they would pressure, isolate, or punish. Why? Because their own position depended on obedience to the sultan's desire. Some even used kindness as a weapon. They would befriend the youngest girls, tell them stories, dress them in silk, make them feel lonely, to hand them over when the king summoned. That betrayal cut deepest. In China's forbidden city, certain senior concubines, known as Gifei, were responsible for testing new recruits, watching how they walked, bowed, or reacted to praise. If a girl trembled too much, she was labeled useless. If she cried, she was called disloyal. If she resisted, she was punished in silence. All under the gaze of another woman who had once been just like her. This system created a cycle where victims became agents of the very machine that broke them. And they justified it to themselves. I'm helping her survive. At least I'm gentle. I have no choice. But the truth was darker. By participating, they were preserving a brutal tradition. And the palace encouraged it. Dividing the girls was key to control. If they turned on each other, they would never turn on the king. There are ancient records of secret alliances formed among the girls' sisters in silence. But these alliances were always short-lived. Spies were everywhere. One wrong word could mean death, so fear ruled. In fear, cruelty thrives. Every system built on silence eventually collapses. But when the royal harems fell, the truth didn't come out with fireworks. It came in whispers through the diaries, memoirs, and broken testimonies of the forgotten girls who had survived. In the Ottoman Empire, the decline began with modernization. As the empire weakened in the 19th century, the once powerful harem system began to rot from within. The sultans lost influence, and so did their keepers. Harem gates that had been shut for centuries were opened, but what emerged wasn't the image of luxurious women in veils. What came out were damaged lives, confused identities, and horrifying silence. Some girls fled to distant provinces, changed their names, and tried to live normal lives. Others couldn't escape. Without titles or family, many ex-harem girls were forced into prostitution to survive. The world outside didn't care about their past. It judged them by the roles they had been forced into. In China, the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912 ended the concubine system formally. But the damage lingered. Imperial women, once revered or envied, were suddenly cast out. Some were killed by revolutionaries. Others, like Lady Sugui, one of the emperor's concubines, wrote memoirs that revealed how little power they had, how many lies they were told, and how many girls had vanished inside the walls, never to be remembered. In India, when the British Raj dissolved princely states, many royal harems were disbanded, but again, no justice followed. The courtesans and concubines were seen as embarrassing relics of a barbaric past. The British didn't help them. The new Indian government didn't care. These women became footnotes in a new chapter of independence. Even in historical records, their names were rarely written. They were only called Lady So-and-so, or worse, just the girl. No identity. No voice. Silence was preserved, even in freedom. But some voices did survive. In 20th century books, rare interviews, and oral histories, scholars began piecing together fragments of these hidden lives. The stories were consistent across empires. Groomed as children, trained in fear, betrayed by those they trusted, and discarded when no longer useful. These weren't isolated horrors. This was a system, and the worst part, many of the royal families that created these harems still exist. Today, some now celebrated in pop culture, royalty magazines, or tourism brochures. Their castles remain, their bloodlines survive. But the girls? Their names were buried beneath gold and shame. It would be comforting to think these horrors ended with the fall of ancient empires. But they didn't. In fact, the very blueprints of royal grooming systems, the manipulation, isolation, the branding of young girls as property still exist today. Only the names have changed. Modern human trafficking rings have learned from history's darkest institutions. Like the ancient harems, today's trafficking systems often start with poverty and a promise. Recruiters, sometimes even family members, target young girls with offers of education, jobs, or marriage. Just like the young girls once sent to serve kings, these victims are separated from their families, renamed, and hidden away. Psychological control is key, just as it was in royal courts. The girls are taught to obey, to smile, to fear outsiders, and to believe their captors are their only source of survival. In ancient harems, this was done through etiquette classes and ritual punishments. Today it's done with threats, drugs, and dependency. Even the use of luxury mirrors the past. Traffickers often dress girls in expensive clothes, keep them in lavish apartments, and tell them they're special or chosen. In the Ottoman harem, a girl's worth was tied to her beauty and silence. The same psychology is used today, only now it's for private clients, not emperors. One of the most chilling examples is the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, where powerful elites were exposed using a grooming network that eerily resembled royal systems of the past. Isolation of girls, psychological control, use of luxury to mask abuse, systematic silencing of victims, and just like in the ancient world, there were insiders helping people who managed the girls, hid the abuse, and protected those in power. In many countries today, child brides are still sold under the guise of tradition. In some regions, girls as young as 9 are trafficked into elite households where they're renamed, dressed up and used just like they were in the courts of emperors and sultans. The royal harems may have fallen, but the system did not die. It simply moved underground. And tragically, Modern society often turns the other way, just like ancient citizens who assume palace girls lived in luxury. But the truth? The screams are still silent. The girls are still invisible. And the cycle continues, fueled by money, tradition, and power. The ancient girls are gone, their names erased, their graves unmarked. But the echoes of their suffering haven't disappeared. They live on in every trafficked girl today, in every silence forced upon victims, and in every institution that still profits from innocence. So why tell their story? Because ignoring it allows the cycle to repeat. We live in a world where luxury still hides pain, where wealth and power still silence abuse, where girls are still told to smile, to obey, to not ask questions. By understanding the royal grooming systems of the past, we see the patterns of the same techniques of isolation: reward and punishment, renaming and control. These weren't accidents. They were systems, carefully built, perfected over centuries. And when we see those same patterns appear in modern society in elite rings, in trafficking, even in some marriages, we recognize them for what they are: descendants of a dark royal legacy. History gives us the power to see beneath the surface. It teaches us that abuse doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it wears silk. Sometimes it hides behind palace walls. Sometimes it's so normalized, the world calls it tradition. But stories like these also give us something else: a responsibility. To speak for those who couldn't, to break the silence they were forced to keep, to hold modern systems accountable. Starts with awareness, with education, with asking hard questions like why so many victims are still invisible, why legal systems still fail survivors, and why society often protects the powerful over the powerless. This isn't just a story about the past, it's a mirror held up to our present, and until we confront what it reflects, the cycle will go on. Somewhere even now, a young girl is being told she's been chosen. She's being taken from her family, given new clothes, taught to smile, and locked behind a beautiful door. She doesn't know she's part of a system older than kings, but we do.